Hi, welcome to our panel. My name is Rebecca Rolnick, and we are all here today to discuss supporting neurodivergent students and educators in environmental education. So this topic started as a chat in the discussion board that I started at last year's virtual conference. So this session is meant to be an extension of that discussion, but this is only the beginning of a larger conversation that we hope will continue in the environmental education community. So what does neurodivergent mean? The term neurodiversity was coined in, I think, 1990 by Australian sociologist Judy Singer, and it refers to things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and a lot of other things. But it's the idea that these things are not inherently always disabilities, but just that different people's brains are wired in different ways. And there's a quote from Harvey Bloom in 1998 where he wrote that neurodiversity may be every bit as crucial for the human race as biodiversity is for life in general. Who can say what form of wiring will prove to be best at any given moment? So before I introduce our panelists, just to back up a minute, who am I and why am I specifically running this panel? Why is it important to me? So I am an independent naturalist and environmental educator, and I started thinking deeply about these topics about a year ago when I figured out that I started to seriously think that I might be on the autism spectrum. So the thing about the autism spectrum is that the diagnostic criteria were written mostly based on boys, but girls can often present a bit differently and so are often undiagnosed. So I won't go into detail about the specific traits, about why I think about that myself right now. But I have learned that girls and women often are undiagnosed or don't get diagnosed until later in life because they don't fit the stereotype and often are better than boys at masking, which means hiding their symptoms. And a lot of women or girls often don't get an official evaluation because sometimes it can be inaccessible or for certain kinds of people. So the first point that I want to make is that neurodiversity is not just about kids and about the students that we're working with, but it's also about adults. And that adults are still neurodivergent when they grow up and might need accommodations and support. So whether we know it or not, as educators, we will probably all encounter neurodivergent students and also coworkers. So I'm not an expert on these topics. It's just something that I think is important. So that's why I brought together this panel for us all to share our experiences. And so the other thing about neurodiversity, as I started reading more about autism and dyslexia and these different things, is that it's very often referred to, especially when it's written about by neurotypical people, which means people who aren't neurodivergent, is that these traits are often referred to as disabilities or deficiencies. And so this is a pretty large percentage of people that have been taught to believe that there's something wrong with them and that they have to hide a part of who they are. And I think that's a big problem. And so this summer, I worked for the Wild Wonder Nature Journal Educators Conference with John Mirlaws, who's here. And one of the keynote speakers, Rob Wade, was talking about how every person is born with their own unique genius, and how as educators, it's our job to help them find that. And so if we want to reach that goal, I think it's really important for all of us to have an understanding of neurodiversity and how to support neurodivergent individuals. And so neurodivergent people are all very different from each other and might need to be supported in different ways. So I'm not saying that we should be already prepared for every single type of person that we might encounter, but at least it would be good to be aware that we're all interacting with this world of neurodiversity already, whether we like it or not, we're already in it. And another thing that I started thinking about is that environmental education might be uniquely positioned to provide benefits for neurodivergent students. So for example, I read that when I was reading about the types of learning environments that dyslexic students do well in, it just happens to be similar to a forest school type of setting, which has small groups and multisensory experiences. And I've also heard anecdotal evidence that suggests that outdoor programs like that are very popular among autistic students. But there hasn't been a lot of research to really formally evaluate the impacts of these programs. So with that introduction out of the way, I will give all of our panelists a chance to introduce themselves. So our first question today is, could you introduce yourself and what kind of environmental education work do you do? And what is your connection to neurodiversity? So I will start with Katrina.
Hello, everybody. I'm Katrina Thomas. So in terms of environmental education, I am looking for my next job. I've done some volunteer writing for the Southern Conservation Trust. I've had an internship with a young naturalist group. I've had summer camp jobs, some small things like that, and I'm looking for a job. In the meantime, I'm currently working on my Environmental Educators of North Carolina certification and hoping to find some museum work or something. My connection to neurodiversity is that I am autistic and ADHD. And I feel like I've grown up at a time when, I don't know, I don't want to say the stigma, but the perception around autism changed quite a lot because I grew up in late 90s, early 2000s and 2010s. So I've seen things change quite a bit since then, and I've been able to learn and advocate as I grew up.
Thank you. Sylvia.
Hello, my name is Sylvia Collazo, and I'm actually a doctoral candidate in exceptional student education at Florida Atlantic University. And I'm interested in inclusive practices in environmental education, as well as integration of nature into early childhood special education. It's kind of seeing inclusion from both angles. I have a lifetime of experience as a sibling of a now adult with autism and intellectual disabilities. And I've spent about 20 years serving children of different abilities, their families, and educators in different roles. So presently what I've been doing, I've been working on my doctorate, and I've been spending the last several years focusing on nature-based early childhood education. So I do focus more with the little ones, and I am actually preparing to defend my dissertation, where I created a professional development training program for teachers of young children with different exceptionalities on how they can embed nature-based activities into their practice. So really reaching out to those more traditional programs and seeing how they can support little ones who may be displaying some needs and how they can bring nature in.
Thank you. And John Muir-Laws.
Hi there. I'm John Muir-Laws. I am an exquisitely dyslexic scientist. And that was a challenge when I was a youngster, because in school, all the cookies go to the kids who can spell and do their multiplication tables. And I never was one of those kids. Early on, figured out that I was different and thought that that meant that I was stupid. And but my kind of my link with what prevented me from giving up was actually a nature journal. And after I would go through a grueling day at school, I could decompress by taking my little notebook and doing art in nature in urban parks in San Francisco on my way back home. And that's how I kind of got myself back into kind of a functional place. As an adult, as an educator, I've continued to use journaling as a tool to connect people with the natural world. And I find it is incredibly powerful for everybody. And but because of its plasticity, its ability to kind of to bend to the preferences and skill set of individual learners, it's also been a great tool for other dyslexic kids and other kids whose brains are kind of wired all sorts of different ways.
Thank you. All right, so our next question is, how do you get the support that you need as a neurodivergent environmental educator? What do you need, and how do you go about asking for accommodations? Or how do you support neurodivergent students in your environmental education work?
All right, so I'm going to start out by talking about the sorts of supports that I need. In school, I had extended time. That's not necessarily an option in the workplace. You know, homework assignment is a lot different from, for instance, when I was working in an AR office, and there were statements and reports that need to be filed on time. But, you know, because I work a little bit more slowly and I think very analytically and notice a lot of details, my brain can get bogged down. So it's really good for me to have a clear schedule and set of timelines and expectations. So, you know, I make sure that I ask for written directions if possible, and that I keep up with copies of any handbooks that I need. And when I was working in an AR office, I would create dozens upon dozens of folders based on date and company and whatever to make sure everything stayed organized. I know visual or pictorial schedules can be helpful for young children with autism. I'm more of a verbal person, but I understand how that's helpful because I don't see things well in my mind. Let's see, another support that I need is probably learning, you know, is probably just communicating effectively. I feel like I'm a good verbal communicator in general, but sometimes my tone doesn't come across quite the way I mean it to, especially in writing, or sometimes my body language or my expressions are a little bit off. So just keeping the communication open, because sometimes I'm not aware of what my body is doing and I look stressed when really I'm just thinking. Or I might say something a little bit blunt, not because I want to be blunt, because I'm responding to something that's happened very quickly and is a little bit overwhelming. Just say the first thing that's happened in my mind. So open communication, clear schedules and expectations. I think also coming up with good ways to take a break or fidget and stim at your desk, whether that be, you know, bringing in a pencil with a nice little grip on it, or be that, you know, if you're in an office setting, you know, planning when you take your breaks if you can, around when you know you might get a little bit overwhelmed or something like that, like get overwhelmed by sensory stuff or get a little bit fatigued from staring at a computer. Outdoor environments are also really great for sensory things as well. I'm very much sensory seeking and often under responsive to sensory stuff. So having, you know, lots of bright colors from all the wildlife and trees and stuff around me is nice. Having leaves or twigs or stones that I can hold on to and fidget with while I talk helps. And it's a harmless way to help keep my brain in balance and stay focused. So yeah, I think finding ways to fidget or take breaks and keeping communication open and watching how you communicate, and having clear expectations on directions and timelines are all good things.
I can just jump in for a second. So Katrina mentioned needing a lot of like extra sensory stimulation. On the other side is a lot of people on the autism spectrum are very overly sensitive to stimulation. And that, for me, that's part of why I think that I might be on the spectrum, because I'm very sensitive to things like loud noises. So another thing might be some people might need an extra quiet work environment. So Sylvia, what about you?
Yeah, so as the individual in the panel who does not identify as someone who is neurodiverse, but is been working with individuals who do, I feel like my role has been more in helping educate my fellow peers, and kind of bring to light some of these needs and this shift of perception, really. And I think Rebecca alluded to this earlier with this idea that for a long time we've seen individuals who, or we identify, and as somebody who's coming from a special education field, so often view autism and ADHD and dyslexia as these disabilities. And while there's certainly a lot of different categories of needs that may appear to be and can very much be disabling, there are also some that really just have different sets of strengths. And I feel like being in a position where I can help shift other teachers' perception of these kind of needs to, instead of looking at it, it's like, well, where is the deficiency? Where is it that we can help make up for something that might be lacking? Really focusing on strengths instead, and really understanding how different individuals can learn and process and communicate differently, and that's okay. And that's one of the things that I think really drew me into this idea of learning in nature, because nature is kind of a nice even playing field. It does not judge. It just kind of creates a space for everyone to just be themselves to whatever extent that is. So as I said before, like really focusing on the strengths of the individual. And I'm glad that you jumped in, Rebecca, and kind of mentioned like different individuals require different things. And that's very reflective of us all. You know, we all have our preferences, and we all have things that we feel like we function best in. One of the things that I know I have seen as an educator myself, when I was working with the younger children, definitely providing those sensory opportunities, I think, was really helpful, and allowing children to really explore to whatever extent that they were more comfortable. Some were really hands-on in the dirt if we were doing a gardening activity, and some were very back offish and just kind of wanted to watch. And that was okay, because they were still getting something out of that activity. So just being able to kind of offer the opportunity and let people take part in it as much as they want or feel comfortable with. One thing that I have noticed in environmental education and is kind of this focus, and I know I'm kind of being a little bit of a contrarian, but there's a point to this. I know we're very focused on kind of letting individuals be completely free and unstructured, and there is a place to having some structure. And I think Katrina talked a little bit about that in her story, sharing about her experiences. Just having a little bit of predictability was really helpful. And I don't think that takes away from the experience of nature. So I think as educators, we really need to be reflective of that, to instead of focusing so much of what we want for those that we are working with, but really focusing on what works best for them and meeting them where they're at.
Well, I was finding lots of congruence between what Sylvia was talking about and my experience as a dyslexic. Also as an educator working with dyslexic kids. The outdoor environment is a great place for us to be. For all sorts of neurodivergent kids. When I was working at a residential outdoor education school, I had pretty good classroom management. So if there were kids that were expected to be discipline hazards, they always stuck them in my group. And so I would regularly have these at the start of a week. A teacher would come up to me, and it was a regular occurrence. A teacher would approach me and say, hey, Jack, I just want to let you know that you've got Devin and Kara in your group. And we've been having some problems, some issues, and I told them that they could come up to outdoor school, but on kind of a provisional basis. They had 3 strikes, and then they're going home. And I just want to let you know that on the bus ride, a teacher actually said this to me, that on the bus ride there, these kids each were on 2 strikes, and just give the word and they're gone. And, invariably, those would be the kids who would just blossom at the, and I'd go like, okay, thank you for telling me. And then I'd walk away just secretly going, goody, I've got those 2 kids in my group. This is going to be a great week. And like, they're the ones that find the newt under the rock, all these sorts of things, up, down, over, around, and through. But the environment of sitting in a chair, or worse, just staring at a screen. I mean, that's not what kids are supposed to be doing. And especially us neurodivergent kids, we're going nuts in those conditions. But we get out into nature and we thrive. And so in addition to this, as for me as a as an educator myself, what I need to also not be, I need to be given the opportunity to be able to show what my skills are. So as an outdoor educator, it's easy because run around in the woods with kids and get into stuff. Yes, can do it. But then if you're going to be in this long term, what happens is you get promoted. And when you get a promotion, you're increasingly behind a desk. And because you were really good at being an environmental educator, you're now supposed to be really good at managing budgets. And so sort of I think something that would be really helpful for us to think about is how can I advance in my career, but not get tracked into the skill set that is not, which takes advantage of the sorts of strengths that Sylvia was talking about. How can I maintain within those strengths and bring those to whatever I'm doing, and also not just have to, like, oh, I can't advance in this career, I'd better, cycle out to something else.
What strengths or advantages does your neurodiversity give you? Or for Sylvia, what strengths or advantages do you notice in your neurodivergent students? So Katrina.
All right, so autism and ADHD have things that make them more difficult, but there are also some things that are good. For one thing, I'm able to, if I'm really into something, focus on it sometimes for hours and hours at a time. Like if I've got a writing project that I really need to get done, I can stick with it for a really long time. Or if my room happens when you've got when you have visual spatial processing issues and ADHD gets unorganized or something, I can spend a whole day trying to get everything put in place and create a system and pay lots of attention to the details, because that's something that happens with autism and something that happens with ADHD. With autism, you tend to notice details a lot, like, I don't know, like small grammatical errors in copy, or, oh, this isn't quite going to fit. These books aren't quite going to fit on this shelf, or maybe there's a way that I could categorize these in a good way. And also the hyperfocus can be a good part of that. And the hyperfocus has led me to advance a lot, because I came to this field kind of late. I didn't really decide what I wanted to do until my mid-20s, so maybe 24, 25-ish. And in just over a year and a half, I've managed to get about half the hours done for my certification and find some first steps to a career in the field. I think also my autism and ADHD make me compassionate towards others who are differently abled, because I've lived that experience myself, and I know that works, especially if there's something that are not harming others, like, they're just stimming, flapping their hands, or they seem like they're just wandering in space and not quite focused. Those aren't necessarily problem behaviors, they're just different behaviors, and there are ways to reach them. And I also feel like I get to be a role model to these children, which is important to me because more and more children are getting diagnosed with autism and ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions. And I mean, whether there are truly more cases or whether more are getting diagnosed is up for debate, although I personally think it's there are more getting diagnosed. We need representation for these children, and there hasn't always been representation, at least with open people, especially with females. So that representation, that hyper-focus, that attention to detail, all those are good things.
I feel like this is definitely one of those where I wish I just want to let you all share more, because I feel like this is the best opportunity for you to showcase your strengths by sharing them with others. But I've definitely learned from, I've now I can say I've taught anyone from 3 on up, or even actually younger than that, if I really think about it. But one of the things that I've really learned from all the individuals that I've worked with that have been neurodiverse is really helping me and other educators, and even their caregivers, so families too. And I know we don't have time to touch on so many issues, but just helping them realize that different people learn differently, and there's so many different ways to absorb information and integrate information, and being able to just be kind of on display to show, like, yes, this is how we take it in, and this is how we're processing it, and it works for us. I think really helps those of us who may not understand it directly really just see that, like, wow, okay, yeah, maybe we need to step back and start considering the way we're approaching our teaching, because it needs to be adequate to all types of learning. And in that kind of vein, I also think about the different perspectives. I can just think back to doing a gardening activity with my former students, and just being able to kind of see how different learners express their experience, or some may have really dug in to an activity because they really sought that sensory input, and then others were much more verbose, and they decided to just be really good with using their language and expressing themselves that way. So just being able to see how one experience can really mean so many different things to different types of learners. I really love that Katrina really touched on that hyper focus. I definitely have seen that, not just with the children and adults that I've worked with, but even my peers. I have a number of peers who are neurodiverse, and that ability to have such increased awareness of details, details that maybe others might not see. I think that is such an amazing character trait to have, because when you're out in nature, there is so much detail that sometimes we miss. But to have the ability to pick up on those things and be able to share about them, to me, is a huge strength. And I guess the final note that I would think of, and maybe I see this more with my friends, maybe that's something that you kind of have to build towards, but definitely having a much more honest and frank conversations about different issues, whether they're related to the work in environmental education or just in general. Being able to just get the real perspective without kind of doing the sugar coating that sometimes we are taught that we're supposed to kind of do. I feel like it's a strength to be able to just kind of be honest and say things how it is, because that's the way nature is. It presents itself exactly as it is.
Thank you, Sylvia. And now Jack.
If you are a neurodivergent kid, there are a lot of, by the time you, an educator, get to that kid, there are so many doors that have already been closed in that kid's face. And they see, you talked earlier about sort of the deficit idea. They've been exposed to that. But if we don't give up on ourselves, then what we do is we start developing alternate coping mechanisms. So I can't go through that door, but what about that window? And what about that window? And what about digging a hole under? And so you end up being a problem solver that is able to find solutions that other people don't. And so dyslexia and a lot of other conditions where you have a limitation, that limitation forces us to develop other skills. So sometimes that is, just really good. A kid gets really good at reading people. That ends up being really useful in an outdoor ed situation as kids who can pull a group together, or future environmental educators. Katrina was talking about the ability to kind of to zoom in and focus on something. If you we need those people who can really zoom in, and people who can take in the big picture in our larger scientific community. We need the ecologists, and we need people who are going to be studying one aspect of one protein and think that it's fun, right? And so that diversity gives us sort of the full breadth of tools that we need. And so I would say that for the skills that neurodivergent people bring, it really is going to vary from individual to individual. But usually the reason that many kids get identified is that because the standard ways that people are using to teach and to evaluate and engage with kids may not be working for that kid, they are developing these other systems. So having flexibility ourselves as teachers and with ourselves as a person to not have to jump through that particular hoop, realize that there's many ways of doing something, and to celebrate that as a strength. So I used to, for instance, describe myself as I'm severely dyslexic. So they're using that kind of the language that would be appropriate for using with an earthquake. Now I think of myself as exquisitely dyslexic, and realizing that it is the introduction to a whole beautiful set of skills.
Thank you. Now, as a follow-up to the last question, how do you think the environmental education field as a whole, and also say the environmental movement as a whole, could be affected if neurodivergent kids and educators are more supported and feel more empowered? So, Katrina.
All right. I mean, kind of cliche to say, but I mean, representation, empowers people. You see someone who's like you, but you that race, gender, different ability, etc. You're going to believe that you can do it. For me, looking up at seeing Temple Grandin as an animal scientist, animal behaviorist, was a big motivator growing up, because she was autistic and she was doing her thing, working with animals, doing really well. I also think that it will enable us to get different perspectives, because different people see things different ways. Some people with autism might be really good at visual learning and really able to see pictures in their head. A lot of them, because they're really good at details, they might still be able to see a picture, but they might be able to take a bottom up approach rather than a top-down approach that we so often use. And so they might be able to say, okay, I see this, that, and the other behavior that people are doing. How can we put these behaviors together and create a plan to help encourage them to recycle or save energy or whatever? They might be able to think using that slightly different approach from the bottom up. They notice small things, like small changes in, what an animal looks like or how the weather is or something, and they're often emotionally in tune because they have strong emotions themselves. So they sometimes tend to feel compassion, especially for animals, because people judge, but wild animals do not judge. And I think that it'll make things more inclusive for everyone. If you have an inclusive set of scientists, things are going to be more applicable to everyone. You can't just take white neurotypical men and expect to have research that's going to benefit people who are at a racial disadvantage or people who have different abilities. Yeah. Representation and different ways of thinking, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you, Katrina. So what do you think, Sylvia?
I think Katrina hit it. There's not really much more to say. She really got to the point. This idea of representation. I mean, we use that word loosely a lot. It's like, oh, we need to have representation here and there, but to actually truly have representation of different perspectives, perspectives that maybe we haven't even considered in the past because we just didn't take the time to include them. I can only imagine how amazing that would be, not just to the environmental education field, but all fields in general, just to be able to have that. Honestly, I don't know how much more to say. I really think Katrina did an excellent job of hitting the high points with that.
All right, thank you. And Jack, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'll echo Sylvia that Katrina, thank you so much for that. Just kind of my framing on similar ideas is that what we want to do is you've got these you've got a whole bunch of kids that you're going to be working with, and they have all of these hidden superpowers. You don't know what they are, and that isn't a problem. That's really, really fun. It's really fun. The more we're working with a neurodivergent population, like when you get those two kids who are on their second strike, it's going to be a really, really good week. And so what we want to do then is to give diverse opportunities that will give them chances to engage and showcase those skills that you didn't know they had, and perhaps they didn't know they had, because they have been doing so much in a classroom that is that's a controlled environment, right? It's not in the environment that they thrive. But out here, the rules are different, and the world is then a better place. Be playful, and think of it as this, like, oh goody, like this. You don't have to take this neurodivergent kid and put them in the square hole, but to have room in your lesson plans for figuring out where these kids really thrive. Different kids are going to come with different skills. So if your program also engages lots of different learning styles, if your program engages lots of different ways of being in nature. You're going to give those neurodivergent students an opportunity to find the place and way that they are going to shine. And it's fun.
Earlier, I mentioned that there might be some potential for more research about neurodiversity in environmental education, their benefits of outdoor education to neurodivergent people, or benefits of neurodivergent people to environmental education, or anything in that realm. And Sylvia, you are doing your thesis in a topic related to this already, but is there any particular sort of research in this realm that you think it would be interesting to see someone do? And that might increase our knowledge on these topics. So if anyone wants to just jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to share.
Never mind. I'll just say,
No,
Katrina, you can go first again.
Okay, sorry. It's okay. She had it first. She can go. Okay, sorry. One thing I've heard a lot about recently is the sensory benefits. So be that sensory gardens or just having fidget objects like rocks or stones or whatever that kids can mess with, or having, you know, the different smells of different plants and quiet areas and the areas with more bird and insect and water sounds and different textures on the ground and different sensory options. And I would love to see how that affects children's motor development or affects children with different sensory needs. I mean, the sensory part would apply in large part to children who are neurodiverse, especially autistic, ADHD, sensory processing disorder. I feel like the motor development thing could apply to children who are neurotypical or neurodiverse. Another thing I guess could be, you know, not sure how to word this, but, you know, making it more sustainable to be a neurodivergent individual. Don't know why, but I just saw this just now. There's a big push to start using reusable things and use less plastic. And I don't know why, but it just hit me all of a sudden, you know, it can require a lot of extra paper and plastic to be neurodiverse, between the paperwork, medication bottles, fidget toys tend to be made of plastic or rubber, things that have to be thrown away. I mean, even if I want to chew gum as a way to keep my body engaged, as a way to keep my mouth engaged and keep me touching something and moving around when I can't really move my body a whole lot, that tends to have plastic or rubber in it. So looking at some more sustainable fidget options, I guess, and looking at the environmental impact of being neurodivergent and how, you know, I don't know, we can change that. But yeah, I think both of those would be interesting.
Thank you, Katrina. And Sylvia.
I'm really loving this idea of like testing out different options for like fidget toys and things like that, because it's true, a lot of these things are like single-use type items. So I'm looking forward to seeing that, Katrina. Now I see a future in research for you there. I just wanted to share it. Yes, I really did just finish my dissertation research. I'm scheduled to defend in the next couple weeks, actually. And the focus was on really looking at how helping teachers of young children learn more about the benefits of nature and kind of overcome some of those fears and barriers that sometimes come with the idea of teaching with nature and in nature for those who are not used to it. How helping them learn about these things can help them now integrate some of these nature-based activities into their daily routine. And by doing so, impacting the children's development, particularly those who may have different needs. The program I worked with had at least one child with some kind of developmental delay or disability already, and this is a preschool program. So I loved being able to see that there was definitely some visible changes that the teachers reported, not just in themselves, but in the children that they work with. And really for me, I keep thinking the next step which was really the first step I wanted to take, but I guess everything in research, it takes a few steps, um, is really targeting teachers who work in like our self-contained type programs where, you know, they have grouped all these children who are neurodiverse into this one kind of classroom, and being able to bring nature into those spaces more, and being able to help those teachers see that these children can benefit just as much, if not more, from having that type of access and using more natural materials. So I know for myself, that's kind of the next big step with research, is kind of digging deeper into within my own field of special education and really focusing on helping helping show that that it is a neurodiversity, that it's not a disability, and that they can really benefit from nature.
Thank you, Sylvia. And Jack, is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure. I would love to, I don't know the research very well, so maybe this is something that is being investigated thoroughly already. But the idea of looking at what sort of leadership and career ladder growth opportunities can we create for and make available to neurodivergent individuals. Again, my experience in sort of regular career was that that when I was promoted, it was always into management positions that take you increasingly away from nature and more behind a computer, you know, looking at at budgets and things that are not my strength. So how can we support neurodivergent individuals not to then at some point in their career go like, well, if you want to advance, if you want to stay in the system, you'd better learn how to use Excel spreadsheets a little bit better, because that doesn't look like a budget to me. And another thing that I think would be interesting to look at would be how can we help kids celebrate the strengths of others? Because outside of the classroom, we all are going to be integrated together doing things again. What I'd be very interested to see the impact of celebrating neurodivergent strengths on perceptions of the divergence itself.
Thank you. All right, and our last question is just, are there any last thoughts that you want to share with our audience? Anything at all that you want to say that didn't quite fit into the other questions? So, Katrina.
Yeah, I mean, just give kids a chance. Also, you know, we do want to encourage children and focus on their strengths. That's also important that we keep some of the disadvantages that they're at in mind, and we have, you know, reasonable accommodations in place to help them out. You know, some children might have a hard time reading information, or they might have a hard time with transitions, and they might need a timer or a countdown to help them out. Some children, myself included, which included myself when I was growing up, did not have or do not have good spatial and visual awareness or good motor skills. So for instance, things like trying to walk across the log, or walk on rocks, or judge how far to jump or how deep they can go out when swimming, anything like that might be challenging for them. So you've got to make sure that you have clear safety rules, necessary safety measures like life jackets, or if necessary, watch them and hold their hands or help build up to these activities in small steps. Make sure there are good transitions in place, but give people a chance, and don't. This is kind of hard to do because it's easy to want to come up with a description of what someone is like. It makes it easier to identify when someone is neurodivergent, but try not to put people in boxes. And this is something that I struggle with myself. It's easy for me to want to create a checklist and go, yeah, this means that this person is having a hard time with this, or they're struggling with this. But really, neurodivergent people can have different versions of the same behavior. They might have different learning styles. They come in all genders and backgrounds, ethnicities, income levels, etc. So, one child with autism or ADHD might be, a social butterfly and very sensory seeking, and the little boy or the other might be quiet little girl who kind of, avoids sensory stuff, and maybe has more typical interests like cats, versus unusual ones that we think of, like a very specific part of a train or tree or something. But she could still be every bit as autistic as someone else. Yeah.
If I could actually jump in for a second, this whole idea of accommodations, I think this is why it's so important to have more representation and for kids and adults to be able to figure out more easily the trait that they have if they're neurodivergent, because sometimes adults think that you shouldn't tell them that they're autistic or that they're dyslexic, because then they'll feel like they're not as good as everybody else. We shouldn't tell them. But I think it's really important for people to know who they are and to have that knowledge and that self-awareness of what they need, because it is really hard for someone on the outside to figure out sometimes what it is that specific person needs in that moment, especially. And so I think that's why it's really important for these things to be talked about more, so that people can figure out, what it is that makes them neurodivergent, and to be able to speak up and to be able to advocate for themselves, whatever it is that they need. And this part I relate to a lot. I mentioned that I think that I might be neurodivergent, haven't been evaluated, but I definitely have a disability, which is that I was born with. I have cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease. And so there's a space where neurodiversity and disability overlap in some cases, where people do need accommodations. And so that's something that I personally have always had to deal with, is being able to advocate for myself, being able to get accommodations that I need in school or in work. And that's something that can be very, very difficult. Even if people are understanding, it's hard, because when you go into a situation with a new job or a new employer or whatever, you don't know if the person is going to be understanding and they're going to help you, or if they're going to make it hard for you to get what you need. And so I think just awareness of helping people learn how to advocate for themselves, and how to ask for what they need, and how to ask for help without feeling like you're a burden, or feeling like you're getting something, extra or special. Because I think what it comes down to is we all need certain things to be able to thrive, and that's different for all of us to be able to function at our full potential. And we all deserve to have whatever that is, even if it's different from what other people have. So that's what I have to say. So Sylvia, we can go to you next.
I definitely can empathize with some of the things that you shared, Rebecca, when it comes to learning about that need for self-advocacy. And I know in the field of special education, we try so much to push this idea of teaching others to advocate for themselves, but we have to realize that that's probably a skill that everyone can absolutely benefit from, because we never know when situations will arise, we'll need those skills. And thinking about the idea of advocacy, for those who are listening out there, who are educators or running programs in environmental education, thinking about how you can also be advocates on behalf of those who may have different needs and strengths and preferences, when you're seeking out funding and resources from the communities or organizations, keeping those things in mind, that if you're wanting to serve your community, well, that community involves individuals who are neurodiverse, individuals who have disabilities, individuals who are going to need maybe some accommodations and to really benefit from your program. So definitely keeping that advocacy mindset, not just expecting individuals to try to do it for themselves, but also like that's our role too, to advocate for others as well. The other piece I would encourage everyone to do is really reach out to like the state or regional environmental education groups. I know a lot of states, if not all, have some kind of affiliate program through the like a branch off the NAAEE, and get involved with the movements within the organizations that deal with justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion issues. There's a big interest now to really push for these kind of issues and really putting them in the forefront of people's minds. And I feel like this is the best place and best time to really jump in and bring some more of these issues to light. So getting involved with local organizations, historic organizations, I think it's a good way to really help your voice be heard and make sure that everybody is being included and supported.
Thank you, Sylvia. And finally, Jack, any last thoughts that you would like to share with the audience?
Sure. If you are a neurodivergent youth or environmental educator earlier in your career, and you're listening to this, so two things. One, you're not broken, right? This is just part of kind of the amazing diversity of our species. There are some things that are more difficult for some people and other things that are easier for other people. And because that was difficult, you've got skills that other people will never work to develop. And you're also not alone. You're not alone. There's a lot of silence around things that are labeled a disability. There's shame. People don't talk about them. But there's a large community of us out here, and the more that we can be here for each other, the better, which leads me to my final thought. If you are a person who is senior in your career, you're a grown-up, you're an adult, and you are neurodivergent and you made it, I want to invite you to step up and share your story and start being vocal about it. Put it back into your identity. The things that you might have hidden because of shame associated with them. Start sharing those stories and make it part of your narrative of who you are. And that will be really supporting and inspiring to other neurodivergent people, and will also help other people who are not understand that this isn't a deficit, and that we are everywhere. And you can do this.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Katrina, for being here and being part of this conversation. It's about time for us to wrap up. And we will also, if you're watching this in the conference, we will have some resources on the page, this video. I'm not exactly how you'll access them, but you'll be able to get to some more resources that we can share. And if you want to continue this conversation, you can contact me anytime, and I would be happy to discuss all of this. So thank you again for watching, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.